Sandy Rios in the morning.
Sandy Rios in the morning
On AFR Talk.
Sandy Rios back with you on AFR Talk. Thank you for spending this morning with me. I told you in the first segment, in case you just tuned in, I want to give a little background again. There are financial problems all over the globe right now. There are a few healthy countries, but most are not. And certainly in Europe, there's tremendous turmoil. We've heard about the riots happening in Greece, and I've told you some tragic stories of the loss of medical care. The hospitals are not able to function. And now this morning I read you a story out of Spain. There are riots in the streets. Government workers are having some of their income cut, and they're beside themselves, and they're angry with government. And the hospitals there are not functioning fully because everything is funded by the government. Everything goes into this big pool, and the government pays almost everyone, almost everything. That's what socialism is about. And so as this is taking place, and like in France, I told you, also the wealthy are fleeing France, so their tax base is just going to shrink, and it's going to get worse. And we're going to have problems among the government workers of France, of which most people are government workers. And if you think that isn't coming to our shores, think again. We are hurtling down the path to socialism, or maybe even worse from my perspective. And we have a cliff coming up, as a matter of fact. It was an agreed-upon agreement by both sides of the aisle in Congress because they just can't make up their minds. They can't make hard decisions. And so if something doesn't happen by January 2nd, there will be a tremendous tax increase in this country. And the Pentagon budget will be cut by $500 billion, which is extremely dangerous level of cuts. Okay, so we have people in Congress who can't seem to make the hard decisions. They can't make the hard decisions because they are afraid they won't be reelected. And so they keep putting things off and putting things off. Even many that were elected through the Tea Party efforts got into Congress, and then their knees went weak. Some did not, but some did. Well, there is a need for us to do something about that, and I don't think anybody here in Washington that's serving in public office, very few, are going to have the courage to do what's right without some help. And so enter the Coalition to Reduce Spending. Jonathan Bydlak. Jonathan, I didn't even ask you ever how to pronounce your last name. Did I get it right?
It's actually Bydlak.
Bydlak. All right, I'm glad I asked. Jonathan is the president of the Coalition to Reduce Spending, and Jonathan is a graduate of Princeton. He's had expertise. He's young, but he knows a lot. He graduated from Princeton in finance and has had some experience in the business world, and this is a great concern for him. Jonathan, let's go back a little bit. Our debt, you probably know better than I do, but is $14 trillion right now?
Yeah, it's actually even higher than that. I believe it's 15.7 trillion, and it's approaching 16.
All right, so tell us how we got here, and I want you to talk about it in political terms. I want to talk about it, and I don't often do this. Democrats, Republicans, what piece of that guilt do they each own?
Yeah. Well, we actually have an op-ed today in the Daily Caller, and one of the things we say in the op-ed, which is I think a really succinct way of putting this, is that debt is a symptom of the problem, and debt arises from running deficits all the time, which basically just means that the government is spending more money than they're taking in, and so. Look, this is a bipartisan problem. We've had Democrats control Congress, we've had Republicans control Congress, we've had Democratic presidents, we've had Republican presidents, and there really hasn't been a time where spending hasn't increased. So, in my opinion, this is really a mutual problem, and there are I suppose differing degrees at different points in time as to who's responsible. Right now we have President Obama who's expanding government spending. Back in the 2000s, we had President Bush expanding spending, and so this is a problem that unfortunately it seems neither party really wants to target, and so now of course we find ourselves with entitlement spending exploding out of control, and sort of threatening to bust the budget even more, and we have a $1.3 trillion deficit. Which basically means we are adding debt now at an exponential rate, and I think that's something that most Americans are concerned about, and people are starting to wake up to the fact that ultimately this is a spending problem that's causing this. If you pull the average person on the street and you say that you're taking in less money than you're spending, their answer is going to be that you have to go and spend less money. And so for a long time, that realization wasn't really there with the government. People just kind of had this attitude that we can just spend and we can bring home the goods, if you will, now and deal with the consequences later. And as you and I know, essentially later is now, later is here. And so now we're starting to face those consequences, and so the solution, just as it would be in our private lives, is that we need to cut spending.
Yes, and I think this is a big philosophical divide between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats, now there are exceptions, and as I said to you when we've talked about this before, there's a third category, and I think it's the left. The left is just hurtling down the pike and gaining more and more power, and they really don't care if they send us off a financial cliff. And so we're not dealing in good faith like we once were. But let me just say, the debt ceiling keeps coming up. I mean, how many times, I've lost count, Jonathan, do you know how many times the Congress has raised the debt ceiling since Obama's been in office?
It's not that many since Obama's been in office. This is the sort
maybe
of thing
three,
that...
maybe three times,
yeah,
I think.
I mean, the debt
that's
ceiling
enough.
debate comes... Right. The debt ceiling debate comes up every few years, and regardless of which party controls Congress, they basically realize that, while we can't... as you and I know, the debt ceiling has always been raised. And of course, at the same time, you ask, well, if it's always been raised, why not just raise it to, $1 gazillion, and then you never need to worry about raising the debt ceiling. And of course, the reason that doesn't happen is because Congress always recognizes that, well, we can't raise the debt ceiling too much because that'll look bad to the American people. And so, they assume that people aren't paying that close attention. And, so this debate happens, they raise it a little bit, and then, it comes up again a year or two later, or, 5 years later, whenever it may be. And we have this same debate over and over again.
But the point is that every time it comes up, they cave. They always do it. Nobody ever holds the line. And so the debt ceiling goes up and up and up. Our debt gets greater and greater, and now we are reaching a crisis. And so, Jonathan, you've come up, your organization, Coalition to Reduce Spending, has come up with a way to counter this. Tell them about the pledge that you would like to require every candidate for Congress, Senate or, the House, to sign.
Sure. Yeah, so my argument is this, one of the big problems we have is that, people run for office saying they're committed to addressing the debt. But then what does that really mean, right? A lot of people end up going and they get into office, and as you and I know, they don't vote according to the promises that they made. And part of that is just because, they speak in vague terms when they're running for office. So, from our perspective, right, you have people who end up joining Congress, and then, the first big spending bill comes up and they're voting for it. And then when you say, well, we thought you were supposed to be a fiscal conservative, the response is always, well, I didn't say I was opposed to this spending, So our idea is to basically go and put people on the record when they're running in more certain terms. And so what we've done is we've devised what we call the Reject the Debt Spending Pledge. And the spending pledge basically has three components. The first is that they will only vote for balanced budgets. That's pretty straightforward. The second is that they'll only vote for new spending programs that are offset elsewhere in the budget. Now, we think that's a pretty flexible term. That's actually modeled after the work that Tom Coburn has done in the Senate. But the basic argument here is that, look, if you want to add a new spending program, that's fine. You can make the justification that there should be some program, but you need to cut spending somewhere else. And if you're going to propose spending that starts immediately, then you need to cut spending immediately.
Let's sit on that for a second. Because what's happening is they're saying, oh, sure, we'll cut programs, but we're going to do that in 30 years or 10 years even, 14 years.
Right.
That will be cut when we're out of office.
The thing I always say on that is that, look, if you want to propose a spending program that's going to start in 30 years, then fine, you can cut spending, and you can offset that by cutting spending in 30 years as well. But if you're going to propose programs now, which as you and I know is 99.9% of the time, then you also need to go and offset that now. And I think that's a good rule of thumb, and that's something that just makes intuitive sense to everyone. Again, everyone except for our elected officials.
All right. So then the pledge is don't vote for any budget that isn't balanced, or any appropriations bill that increases total spending. And correct. 2, don't vote to authorize new programs, fund new programs without offsetting the cuts in other programs, and do those simultaneously, not separated by decades. And number 3 is what, Jonathan?
Yeah. So the third plank is not to increase borrowing or raise the debt ceiling. And this one, of course, is something that I think is really valuable right now, since this is the debate, as you just said, that comes up rather frequently and will likely come up again sometime after November, be it December, be it January of next year, where we're going to bump up against that debt ceiling again, and we're going to have this debate. And so, we believe it's very critical that we have people in office who are committed to, not just going and caving on that issue, because, when these debates, the value of the debt ceiling debates is that there's an actual public discussion about the nature of our debt and what the solution should be. And so, in many ways, for people who are committed to cutting spending, this is the biggest opportunity that exists to sort of shape the public discussion and actually obtain substantive cuts. And so we think it's important to make sure that people are on the record on this issue and committed to not raising the debt ceiling.
And I think, Jonathan, one of the things that has really stunned me since I've been in Washington, my second tour here, my second tour of duty, this is my second year, the second time, is the unserious way in which congressmen are approaching our deficit. It is appalling, and with the few exceptions like Tom Coburn and Jim DeMint and help me fill in some blanks here.
Sure, Rand Paul.
Rand Paul, yes. Yeah, there's some who are very serious about it, but the rest of them, it's like it's business as usual, and it is not business as usual. And so this is not just an intellectual exercise, a nice thing to do. This really is very crucial. So the question is, how are you coming here now? Because there's already a pledge. There's a no new tax pledge. It's Grover Norquist's pledge. How would you contrast these two pledges?
Sure. So a couple comments, right? So about pledges more generally, there are two big advantages that I see with sort of the way that we're going about doing this. And the first is that the great advantage of a pledge is that it gives voters information that they otherwise wouldn't have when they're assessing candidates, right? So when someone runs and they say, I'm for limited government, I'm for small government, well, what does that mean, right?
It's
well,
too
now
vague.
we're very clearly defining what it means. Yep. So if I'm looking at who's running and I want, as a voter, and I want to assess who I want to vote for, you now have more information to make a more informed choice, knowing that they signed the Reject the Debt pledge. The second thing is, of course, that once they get into office, there's also a means for voters to hold them accountable. So if someone votes according to the pledge, then that's something that is obviously a great thing. If they end up breaking the pledge, then you have now voters can go and can say, wait a minute, you made this promise when you were running, and now you haven't followed through on that. So there's a means of accountability that exists that otherwise would not.
Jonathan,
now with respect to our pledge,
we're only going to have like 3 minutes, so I'm going to
Sure.
finish this sentence for you. The difference between this pledge and the Grover Norquist pledge is that it does not take tax corporate loopholes off the table. Everything is on the table. All benefits to anybody is on the table to be considered for cuts, for raises. It's just a matter of really wanting to balance the budget in the most wise way, and nothing is off base.
That's right.
So,
that's exactly
all right.
Right.
So, Jonathan, there is a candidate I think that's running who has embraced your pledge, and that I want to get to that before we say goodbye here. That's
right. Yeah. So we're actually announcing today in our Daily Caller editorial that Ted Cruz, who is running for Senate in Texas, has signed the Reject the Debt pledge, along with two Texas congressional candidates, all of whom are in runoffs on July 31st, Wes Riddle and Jessica Puente Bradshaw. And so, I think this is a big deal, right? The Senate race in Texas that Cruz and David Dewhurst are running in is one of the highest profile, if not the highest profile, Senate race in the country right now. And so I think it speaks volumes that we've been able to get him to agree to sign the pledge, and I think that obviously shows a commitment on his part to these issues that the average candidate probably doesn't have.
All right, so and let me just emphasize this: the benefit of this, the importance of this is that I know there were so many new Tea Party candidates that were elected, Jonathan, and we were also optimistic and hopeful. But when it came down to the fight over this last debt ceiling increase, many of us were just so discouraged because they embraced, we feel, something extremely dangerous, and that was the potential, and this is my prejudice, I know you don't weigh in on this, but the defense cut spending is just unconscionable. We cannot do this as a nation at this time where we're in so much conflict. It will devastate our national defense if these cuts go through, and many of those candidates, new people, voted to embrace this and to play chess to play, I guess, Russian roulette with our budget. And so this pledge would be more definite and more, and still gives them some play. It isn't so onerous that it doesn't give them wiggle room to make, decisions with the information that they have. But it's some principles that are very important. And so that's why I think it's a very good idea, Jonathan.
Yeah, the pledge is, in our opinion, a guide to good policy. That's how we view it. And, I think it's something that, frankly, is really a nonpartisan issue. Our debt problem is something that all sides are concerned about. And, ultimately the math is such that you have to cut spending to reduce the deficit and to cut the national debt. And so, that's why we're here. That's the purpose of our organization. I encourage everyone to visit our website at reducespending.org and get involved. We have a voter pledge on our website as well, which people can sign. We have plenty of more background information about the issue. And you can, of course, read the actual text of the candidate pledge and sort of, promote the candidate pledge to candidates that or your elected officials.
Yeah, so like if someone is listening who has an organization that is supporting a candidate and this is a really important thing to them, and I would hope that I think this is an important issue to all of us because, well, the president is right about one thing. We do our fortunes do rise and fall together. There's no question about that, for better or for worse. And so the financial crisis is something that's going to sink all of us if it sinks any of us. No question about it. So reducespending.org is the website. Reject the Debt is the pledge. It's the coalition to reduce spending, and Jonathan Bydlak is the president. Jonathan, thank you so much. We wish you all the best.
Thanks a lot, Sandy. Nice to talk to you.
Oh, and the Daily Caller piece. How can they find that? Give us.
Yeah, just go to dailycaller.com and search Coalition Reduce Spending, and you should find it.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we're going to go back to the president's speech Friday night in Roanoke, and I want to make some more detailed comments about that and also to open the phone line. Sandy Rios in the morning on AFR Talk.